Someone cuts you off in traffic and your hand is on the horn before you've even decided to use it. Or a coworker sends a message so clipped it barely counts as a sentence, and you spend the next hour deciding what it means about you. Or someone you love snaps at you over something small, and you're still replaying it at midnight, building the perfect comeback you'll never actually say out loud, word for word, like you're rehearsing for a stage no one else is standing on. 2,300 years ago, a philosopher named Zhuangzi told a very short story about a boat that explains almost all of this. And it starts with a man who never even got to finish being angry because the person he was ready to blame turned out not to be there at all. There was once a ferryman who rowed passengers across a wide river, back and forth, all day, every day, for most of his life. It was steady work and mostly quiet work, and he was good at it. Good enough that he barely had to think about the river anymore, the way his own feet had long since stopped noticing the dock's uneven steps. He knew every current, every shallow, every place the water behaved differently depending on the season. Most days blurred together into the same rhythm. Load, row, unload, row back, load again. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was a steady one. And steady had always mattered more to him than exciting. One evening, rowing home after a long day, he found himself in the middle of the river just as the mist began rising off the water. It happened the way it always did at that hour, soft and slow, the river breathing out after holding its breath all day. The light was fading fast now, that narrow window between daylight and true dark. He had maybe 20 minutes left before he'd need to navigate the rest of the way home, mostly by memory and sound. It didn't worry him. He'd made this crossing more times than he could count. The river was quieter at this hour than any other time of day. No shouting from the docks, no haggling over fares, just the sound of his own oars and the occasional bird settling somewhere in the reeds. It had not been a good day. A merchant had shouted at him that morning for being a few minutes late, loudly enough to draw a small crowd at the dock, as if a few minutes were a crime worth witnesses. A family that afternoon had paid him less than they owed, counting the coins slowly enough that he understood they knew exactly what they were doing and were daring him to say something about it. Somewhere in between, a child on the dock had laughed at his patched, ill-fitting sandals, and even that, small as it was, had found a place to land. He hadn't argued either time. He just nodded and rowed and let it settle into his chest, the way people do when arguing doesn't feel worth the cost, or the audience, or the risk of making a bad day even longer than it already was. By evening, none of it had gone anywhere. It had simply been quietly piling up, the way small unspoken things do. A shout here, a slight there, nothing large enough on its own to justify a scene, but all of it sitting low in his chest by the time the sun went down. He just wanted to get home without one more thing happening. That, more than anything, was the only plan he had left for the day. He wasn't an angry man by nature. He was simply a tired one, carrying a fuller than usual load that had nowhere left to go, the kind of day that doesn't announce itself as bad until someone tries to add up all its small parts at once. Out of the mist ahead, another boat came drifting toward him, fast and at the wrong angle. He shouted a warning. Nothing. The boat didn't even change course, as if the warning had landed on empty air. He shouted again, sharper this time, already feeling the whole day rise up behind the words. And then the boat hit his, a hard knock against the side, water slapping over the rail, cold spray reaching his face. That was enough. Everything he'd swallowed all day came up at once, and he spun around, already shouting, already reaching for every sharp word he'd been saving without realizing he was saving them, ready to hand the entire weight of his day to whoever was careless enough to row like that into his evening. And there was no one there. The boat was empty. Its rope trailed loose in the water behind it, snapped clean at the post, and the current had simply carried it into his path, unmanned, with no one at all responsible for where it went. He stood there with his hand still half raised, the shout still sitting unused in his throat. There was nothing left to aim it at. Slowly, standing in the mist, he understood something. The anger had been entirely his own, the whole time, waiting for a target that was never actually going to arrive. He almost laughed, standing there, not because anything was funny, but because there was nowhere left for all that heat to go. The mist kept drifting past, unbothered, exactly as it had all evening. Let's slow down and look at what actually happened there, because it explains more than it first seems to. An empty boat can hit you just as hard as a boat with someone in it, and you still won't stay angry for long, because there's no one to be angry at. But let a person do the exact same thing, the exact same jolt, and something in you lights up instantly, certain of one fact. They meant it. That single word, meant, is doing all the work. It's the difference between a bruise you forget by lunch and one you're still rubbing at midnight. It was never really the impact that made him angry. It was the story he told himself in the half-second after about who was steering, a story his mind wrote almost instantly without waiting for any actual evidence. Here's the part worth sitting with. The merchant who shouted at him that morning was real, an actual person, not an empty boat drifting by accident. But being real doesn't mean they were steering it at you on purpose. Think about the curt email from a coworker who, as it happens, has spent the whole morning dealing with something at home you know nothing about. Think about the short reply from a friend whose patience ran out hours earlier on something that had nothing to do with you at all. There was someone in the boat, but no one was steering it toward you on purpose. Two very different situations that, from the outside, can look exactly the same in the moment they hit you. Here's a way to picture what actually happened. A river never fights the ripples a boat leaves behind. It doesn't hold on to them. It just keeps flowing, and in a few minutes, the ripples are gone, and the water remembers none of them. Say that again, slower. A river never fights the ripples a boat leaves behind. It just keeps flowing, and the ripples disappear on their own. The merchant's bad morning was real, but it was his own rope that broke, somewhere upstream, long before it ever reached this ferryman, and staying angry about it all day doesn't put that rope back together. Anger like that just keeps you standing in the ripples long after the boat that caused them has already drifted out of sight, completely unaware you're still there. And here's the last piece of this worth knowing. You've had your own broken ropes too, moments when your patience gave out somewhere upstream, long before it reached the person standing in front of you, and you knocked into them harder than you meant to. That didn't make you a bad person in that moment. It made you human, running on a day that had already asked too much of you before that moment ever arrived. It made you a boat whose rope had already snapped hours earlier, somewhere the other person never saw. The same forgiveness you're learning to hand an empty boat today is worth handing yourself too on the nights your own rope gave way first, long before anyone else was even in the water with you. Think about the email that lands in your inbox at 9 at night, 3 lines long, no greeting, one line that reads more like an accusation than feedback. Your old instinct is to fire back within the hour. Matched tone, matched edge, a reply that makes, "I noticed that," obvious without ever actually spelling it out, already halfway typed before you finished reading it twice. It feels justified in the moment. It always does, right up until the moment you actually hit send. Your thumb hovers over the button for a second, maybe 2, already composing the next reply in your head before this one has even landed. This time, you read it a third time instead, and you notice something else. You have no idea what this person's day actually looked like before they sat down to type it. You don't know whose rope broke, or when, or how far upstream. Maybe it broke this morning. Maybe it's been fraying for weeks, and this email is just where it finally gave out. So you write back plainly instead, just the facts, nothing loaded, nothing that matches their edge with an edge of your own. It costs you nothing, and it closes the door on a fight the other person might not have even meant to start in the first place. It's not that you don't notice the edge anymore. You just stop assuming it was sharpened for you specifically. You find out 2 days later, almost by accident, that the email went out 20 minutes after they got a call about a sick parent. You hadn't known any of that at the time. You couldn't have. The tone wasn't about you. It had nothing to do with anything you'd done. You just happened to be standing nearby when their boat drifted past, at exactly the wrong moment, carrying a rope that had already broken somewhere else entirely. If you'd matched their edge that night, you'd have spent the whole week feeling justified about a fight that, on their end, never actually took place, and you'd have owed them an apology you didn't know you'd need. So here's the one thing worth carrying out of this story, and it isn't a rule, just a question you're allowed to ask quietly before you respond to whatever just landed on you. Was there really someone steering this aimed at me on purpose, or is this a rope that broke somewhere upstream hours before it ever reached me? Sometimes the honest answer is yes. It really was aimed at you, and you're allowed to respond to that fully and clearly, without any need to shrink it down or pretend you didn't notice. You don't owe anyone a calm reaction to something that was genuinely meant to hurt you. And sometimes the answer is no, and you get to let the whole boat drift on past, the way the ferryman eventually did, without giving it one more minute of your evening. Not reacting to an empty boat isn't weakness, and it isn't pretending nothing happened. It's just seeing clearly what actually happened. A boat came loose somewhere upstream, and it drifted into you, and no one was ever steering it. You don't owe an empty boat your whole evening or your whole night, or the version of tomorrow you've already rehearsed twice. You get your evening back the moment you stop chasing a boat that was never actually headed for you. Some of the sharp things that hit you today were never really about you, and the people who sent them may never know how much of your night they spent uninvited. Let the boat go. Pick your oars back up. That's the whole story.